Welcome to Peacebuilding Initiatives, a space where we explore collaborative ways and paths to nurture healthy, positive relationships through dialogue, cross-cultural understanding, and the courageous work of shifting our own perspectives. This is your host, José Barzola. Thank you for joining us today. In this episode, we're having a conversation on collaborative partnerships for troubled times, transformative solutions, and strategic intelligence. In a world facing overlapping crises, climate change, global conflict, social unrest, economic disruption. Definitely no single sector, institution, or nation can tackle these challenges alone. That's where collaboration comes in, not as a buzzword, but as a strategy for survival and transformation. So today we'll explore how collaborative partnerships are evolving in crisis contexts, what it takes to build trust and shared purpose across differences, real world examples of transformative solutions born from unlikely alliances, and how strategic intelligence, insight that connects dots across systems is the new currency of resilience. We're joined again by our wonderful guest, Dr. Jude Antonyappan, who brings deep experience in cross-sector collaboration, systems thinking, and strategic leadership. Together, we'll unpack how partnerships can move from transactional to truly transformational. So let's get into it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and so thank you so much for being with us again. We'll start a little big, but when we talked about, troubled times, what comes to mind for you right now? If you were to pick, you don't have to pick one. Feel free to go however you like on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose, for the introduction and for providing this service to listeners, because these are times when we, the members of the community, we, the people, have to come together and work through these difficult times. And why are these troubled times? These are troubled times because of our economic factors, because of our social factors, because of our breakdown in our community, sense of community, and our values. These are troubled times because we have reached a point, I'm speaking specifically about our country, United States, where there's a high level of tolerance for intolerance. So what I mean by that, there are specific factors that we have had as problematic instances in our society where the inequality in income, racism, anti-Semitism, lack of tolerance for members of LGBTQ community. We have gone through several historical periods that demonstrate intolerance for the lives of other individuals' well-being and their safety and their sense of security. And we are going through a period of resurgence of that intolerance. So when we begin to tolerate intolerance, then we have a critical mass of or critical period of intolerance that could undermine the foundational values of our society. And those are troubled times because this kind of intolerance is not just rhetoric, it's being exemplified through policies and programs. And there are billions of dollars in funds have been cut for infrastructure projects, for energy projects, for environmental projects, for employment process. Altogether, we have cut about 32 to 36 billions of dollars in various programs that were approved by the previous administration and without any explanation whatsoever, when we just over the weekend decided to give $20 billion to another country based on exclusively the relationship or preferred relationship of one to the other, not the people from people to people, but one human being to other, because a human being who decided to give that $20 billion is someone whom the country trusted with the leadership and executive privilege. And so I'm not for any supporting anyone or critiquing anyone, other than the foundational processes need to be questioned, and the well-being of our collective well-being, our people, the future of our children and our society, the future of our parents who are raising responsible citizenry, who are going to be teachers, firefighters, soldiers, and doctors, and lawyers, and janitors, and community leaders, and politicians. and those parents need to be supported. The young people need to have proper role model. They do not need role model where someone wears a silly crown and post video where that person with a silly crown imitating an archaic and bygone form of government is defecating on Americans. And that is problematic. And I don't know whether someone generated that AI video, but it has been circulating. And young people are demoralized. They're wondering what happened to their country, what happened to the country their parents sacrificed so much for, their grandparents sacrificed so much for. So, are these troubled times? Absolutely. Are these troubled times world over? Absolutely. There are many countries where this kind of, failure in moral leadership is emerging, and this lack of moral leadership is even touted as a virtue and as a matter of humor and as a matter of excusing somehow toxic masculinity as the reason for this kind of failed leadership with a insipid statement that boys will be boys. No, boys will not be boys. Boys are raised as gentlemen by mothers and fathers who understand the responsibilities of parenthood and set good role models for them. Boys are the future leaders of this country, just as girls are the future leaders of this country. And so boys and girls are raised for rising above these troubled times by conscientious parents who work day and night, sometimes 2 jobs, 3 jobs, still struggle to pay the rent and to feed their children nutritious food and try to maintain a balance of extracurricular activities and academic excellence. So therefore, for someone to wear a crucifix and announce this kind of anti-Semitic hatred that members of the community, certain communities should go to gas chambers, and those who perpetrated those kind of values are to be emulated, Nazi leaders are worthy of celebration. Those kind of statements to be excused by leaders of our country is a sure indication of troubled times. It creates a sense of not being safe here, everywhere. And because it comes from some of the, halls of leadership that we would have never, ever, even in our wildest nightmares, as emerging from. So these are indeed economically, politically, in terms of governance, in terms of, emotional safety, social well-being, in terms of strategic application of intelligence, these are troubled times. Yes, indeed.
Thank you so much for diving deep into it from the get-go. I appreciate your passion, your frustration. I think you're really speaking to a lot of folks and a lot of our listeners, including myself, of just trying to make sense of what seems like an upside down world lately. You talked about AI. I don't know what AI video. There's just like so much inundation of information that it is like a needle in a haystack, and I think that in itself is part of the problem. Just like the excessive amounts of information keeps coming out, you can't keep up with it. But and you dive deep a little bit into why collaborative partnerships are important today more than ever before. So thank you so much. I will say that I try to, we always talk about perspective, and I always try to like mirror. I'm like, well, was it this bad like during World War II? Was it this bad in like whatever, context of history? And so I try to like, and I know history gets kind of like cleaned up as time goes on, and the challenging or what would have been troubled times or the atrocities, nowadays in the history books and history classes, it doesn't come off that way. And so I think digging deep into that gives, for me anyways, it gives me some context of like, okay, this too shall hopefully pass. But so shifting to a little bit to how do you define transformative collaboration as opposed to simply just transactional cooperation? I was hoping you kind of go into that a little
Absolutely.
bit.
I mean, What is collaboration? When we collaborate, we have more than one viewpoint. We have more than one perspective. We have more than one take on any given problem. So solving a problem itself, when we solve it collaboratively, it leads to transformation because we learn from each other, we appreciate each other, we learn to reframe the question because we bring multiple lived-in experiences to solving that problem. So solving a problem then becomes a transformative approach to any endeavor. And that, when combined with strategic application of intelligence, especially when we have emotional intelligence, social intelligence, and integrative intelligence applied to that, we are not thinking of just this moment. We are also planning for the future. Most successful societies that withstood historical turmoil are societies that planned well ahead. And President Lyndon Johnson's, for instance, War on Poverty, the Great Society programs, and President Roosevelt's, the New Deal after the Great Depression of 1929 and stock market crash of early 1930s were all instrumental in shaping American society, where we valued each other, where empathy was a valued prospect. There was nothing like too much empathy. There was nothing like too much compassion, where we believed that we as a collective have a responsibility, moral responsibility to support each other, to everyone, irrespective of our political ideology, irrespective of our ethnic background, irrespective of our religious affiliation, irrespective of our, take on life. We had a responsibility to support each other because human life is sacred. Human life in itself has an innate value, and every life that is already here is worthy of support, nurturance, worthy of celebration. So therefore, when we talk of collaborative partnership, we are valuing the sacredness, we are valuing the inherent potential for every being to contribute to the collective, no matter what that is. So therefore, collective partnerships, whether it is between public-private collaboration and public-private philanthropic collaboration, or communities collaborating with each other. When I was a student, we had sister cities in other countries, and we would write letters. We didn't have emails then to some of our pen pals and those other societies, and we received letters back, and we cherished those letters. We learned so much about other cultures, and so I remember, in my home, when one of my uncles in India actually brought I believe it was a Time magazine, I don't remember, where President Kennedy and Jackie Kennedy was depicted, and their undertaking of this. No, it was President Kennedy's administration actually who started this, real effort to mitigate the impact of poverty and to reduce inequality. It was Bobby Kennedy actually who went to Appalachian Mountains and took the cameraman with him and showed the kind of poverty, and which kind of Professor Galbraith from Stanford differentiated between area poverty and case poverty, where he said certain specific areas, geographical areas, are prone to more poverty, and we need to remedy that. And our current vice president wrote about, in his Hillbilly book, also the sort of area poverty. So there was genuine effort to address some of these inequalities through collaborative partnerships and government-funded programs. And so as part of War on Poverty programs, we had the Head Start program, we had community action agencies, private companies were given incentives to hire workers who have been chronically unemployed, or workers who are returning from incarceration, and there were rehabilitation efforts. There was dignity for every life. And President Johnson talked about, the Great Society programs. I mean, nobody is perfect. I'm not saying these presidents are perfect. They had their own, minor imperfections also, but they had the serious commitment to lift Americans out of poverty, to maintain a sense of responsibility, to maintain a sense of collaboration between public-private partnerships and between philanthropic agencies. So the safety net was seen as a fundamental right, not as, as a matter to be ashamed of. But there were, guardrails within how those provisions of the safety net as to how they should be implemented and how they should be administered. Social security programs, for instance, have the least administrative cost of any other programs. So it's not that we didn't know what worked. We know that collaboration works, collaborative partnerships worked. But some would argue that the war on poverty programs were not really that successful, but it depends on which aspect of the war on poverty programs that they're looking at, or which aspect of the New Deal programs they're looking at. There are several parts of the programs that were enormously successful in lifting historically disenfranchised population, historically discriminated, historically exploited populations, to give them at least a fair chance to be able to get education, access resources, and to be able to participate. And when we see that in many minority communities, when someone is lifted, they lift the entire community with them. There are so many basketball players, Shaq, for instance, Shaquille O'Neal, and, Jalen from, Boston Celtics, and LeBron James from the Lakers, and so many of them give millions of dollars for so many different programs to help not just members of the communities that they share their ethnic background with, but children from all communities. And we need leaders like that to be able to go. Government should seek them out to collaborate with them in public-private partnerships. And the president of my university, California State University, where I worked for, nearly quarter century and still associated with on a voluntary basis, is celebrating this public-private partnerships. And he has established a Native American college, and Black Honors College, a center for, celebrating Jewish history and Jewish research, and, a multicultural center, a pride community. And I mean, use this for immigrant families, all along following established legal avenues and legal, resources, but through public-private collaborative ventures, bringing academics into that, community leaders into that. We have a Center for Business, where we have provide startup education, and bring members who are interested in starting business ventures, bring their ideas and provide seed money, and Colson Center for Innovation, for instance, whose leaders, including the executive leaders, are phenomenally committed to that. I mean, these are not individuals who pay lip service to what they're doing, right? They really want to bring about positive change in as many individuals' lives as possible without expecting anything in return. So we need leaders of such caliber to be able to be involved in these collaborative partnerships and use resources effectively, efficiently, and in a way that spreads the well-being instead of concentrating on few hands, where someone can afford to spend $270 million in an election where people's votes are to be decided by information. Instead, they are to be decided by who can donate most funds to elections. I mean, that is unacceptable. And, so we need to be able to look at collaborations that are based on our established norms of interaction, our established pathways for equity and equality and empathy. There is nothing wrong with empathy. If someone claims that human beings are unempathetic, that we don't need empathy, they need to be, given some orientation in and helping them understand empathy. And I know because empathetic understanding is fundamental requirement for critical thinking. If you're not able to place yourself in the shoes of someone else, you will never be able to appreciate the viewpoint of someone whose viewpoint is very much different than yours. So we need to be able to appreciate each other's viewpoint if you need to be able to listen to each other. But appreciating each other's viewpoint doesn't mean we accept evil as our norm. There are foundationally evil practices that take other people's lives, that deprive other people of opportunities, that steal other people's fundamental rights to speech and fundamental rights to live fundamental rights to earn a living. Those are all factors that should not be tolerated, but we can educate people who are mired under illusions that only they have the right to speech, only they have the right to earn a livelihood, only they have the right to a safe living. That is fundamentally narcissistic and fundamentally pathological. And so we want to bring order in a society, and we cannot have order when we have disorderly minds in charge of leadership positions, because then they will desensitize the entire public to human suffering, because the only way they can amass great quantities of wealth, and I won't call it wealth, great quantities of stolen money from other people, is by depriving others of their foundational rights. And so we need to be able to work collaboratively to create the level of understanding where even though someone who has never had to think beyond a self-indulged narcissism will be able to think about empathetic understanding, will be able to think about discharging their responsibilities in a diligent manner that brings well-being to all members of a society and all members of humanity, in fact. And we were doing relatively good job as Americans, despite our imperfections. We were becoming on the way to becoming a perfect society, despite problems and, the unspeakable horrors of slavery and anti-Semitism and, unequal treatment of members of many different communities. And so, but we were working towards that. But now it seems like we are seriously in troubled times. Yeah, so we need collaborative partnerships, everyone coming together to collaborate with each other in our communities, in our institutions, in our families, and in our regions, in our states, and at the federal level.
Thank you. Um, Taking a deep dive into building sustaining collaborative partnerships, what would you say are some of the key ingredients of an effective and lasting partnership across sectors and organizations? And also, where do you most simultaneously, like, where do you see most collaborations break down and why?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. If you think about, collaborations, for instance, let's take a community that wants to collaborate in establishing an after-school program, universal after-school program is universal childcare is a cherished goal, and a community wants to bring that about, but the community, let's say, got a seed grant for starting that. And so when certain members of the community who have time bring mothers and they start the licensing process, and they make certain criteria that only licensed childcare providers would be hired, and they would have a the adult child ratio of say 4:1, because in their research they've established that is an ideal for 4 children. They would be one childcare, adults, and they will also have aides who are providing recreational care, who understand, how children emotional needs need multiple resources, and they for emphasize reading, storytelling, emphasize kinesthetic intelligence, music intelligence. So let's say this is an ideal after-school care where every parent would want to send their child. But they started out for, families that earn below 45,000 per year, right? That was their criteria, because it was meant the money that they obtained was for low-income families. And then it turned out the program was immensely successful. So those who earned more wanted to send their children to the aftercare. But then the aftercare providers who got the seed money said, okay, now we can have a sliding scale, where if your earnings above certain amount, you pay for the childcare, whereas for others, it's free. And the parents decided to pay, and then some of them lost their jobs. So let's say they're the federal workers who were fired. So now they've joined the low-income families, and they can no longer pay what they were paying on a sliding scale. So now a number of licensed childcare providers that they could employ have gone down. And so the adult to children ratio is now, warped. And so the quality of care comes down, and then the parents complain, and then they bring about this requirement. Okay, if you cannot provide on a sliding scale, you can devote your time. Parents can be, care providers, but then they have to be licensed. So there are a variety of arrangements they're bringing about, but the collaboration itself is now lacking that organic quality that it had before. It has become diluted, it has become institutionalized, it is lacking in leaderships, and there was a staff turnover when the complications arose in caring for children, and sometimes parents didn't show up to pick up their children on time. So some care providers had to stay back for a longer period of time. So this is just an example of a small community level collaboration breaking down. And we can take this all the way to state level. Like California, for instance, had this tremendous ambition for this light rail system, and which is a fantastic plan, but there were so many competing interests and so many different versions of it, and so it is still not fully actualized. That's at the state level. And at the federal level, at the current level, there is no paucity of examples that are literally tens of examples to give how when someone who doesn't understand the federal system, worker system, decimates the system and literally opens the country for security violations, for you name it, all kinds of problems. That is what is happening now. So collaborative ventures can break down. In United States, we had a system whereby no matter who the politician was, administrations came and went, but there was a core group of federal workers who were knowledgeable, who were experts in their field, who were brilliant, who were ethical, who were moral, and who knew and understood the international system and the trajectory of the country, who maintained the transition of one administration to the other and protected the integrity of the people's well-being nation. And that was decimated now. And the person who gave this chainsaw to the one of the persons who shall remain unnamed, I don't want to name him, who took the chainsaw and on the stage demonstrated that is what is going to happen to our country, a chainsaw destroying years of expertise, expert-based administrative prospects. I'm not saying there weren't problems with the administration, absolutely, but there are ways to go about that. But the way that the system has been decimated and creating havoc in committed federal workers' lives, there is absolutely no excuse. And that is a clear example of where collaborative partnerships can fail. And you can start it from family as well. Your family is a very efficient collaborative unit. A mother, father, children, grandparents all coming together to raise the next generation and give them values, where a boy is not going to talk about grabbing women by their private parts publicly, and then somehow someone comes and says, well, that's just locker talk. No, that's not locker talk. Boys who are brought up properly with values do not look at women as objects of trivial sensual intelligences. So those are problems, real problems in values. So when family unit breaks down, and when there aren't moral fathers and moral or loving mothers, and the system breaks down, and we see that happening at so many different levels, and we see it happening, playing out in front of our eyes day by day at so many levels. And that is a collaborative partnership breaking down in families and communities and between red and blue states. And we have never had a system where resources were allocated based on how the majority of the citizens in a particular state voted. And despite the fact that so-called red states or that get significant amount of revenues from the federal government compared to the amount of taxes they pay. And so it's just, it's a lack of information that's based on critical thinking and lack of empathy. Understand It doesn't matter whether we are a red state or blue state or whether how anyone voted. We are all Americans and we are all human beings. We all need to, if Mississippi had a problem, if Alabama had a problem, if North Carolina had a problem, it is the responsibility of every state to go to their help. It's a responsibility of federal government to help them. So yeah, that's where we are.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate how when we talk about, collaborative partnerships, it's not just on the macro level of our society and our governments and our institutions. I appreciate the examples of like on an everyday basis, between our households, between, our own partnerships in our community, like in our households, like our neighbors. Yeah, it starts, as you were sharing about morals and values. Um, I think I like to think, being an internal optimist, I like to think we want to strive for what's best for our younger future generations. But the question that kind of got into my mind, I was like, well, where do we drop the ball? Where do we, go wrong? And is it maybe it's a combination of like um not knowing better, not having been modeled what was right, or or and also just survival. Sometimes it's a matter of, oh, got to work those jobs so I can get money to put on the table so that I get food, that the family can eat. So there goes your time. And so you're not actually able to devote the time to like the nurturing. And sometimes, many times we pivot and we rely maybe on like the educational system to do that. And then, I think kind of goes back to something we were talking about earlier, the weaving, how everything's interconnected, and we need to be conscientious in how it is. So if we're relying on our educational system and we're not devoting the funding to our educational system to have the resources to take care of our youth and to provide them the values and morals, or to not have burnout in those systems, but instead we're devoting our funding toward other sectors of our society. So what does that say about our own values and morals, as maybe not in collectively everyone, because I mean many times those decisions are made by those in charge, but what does that say about those in charge? And so it is kind of like, once more, the light bulb moment of like a call to action. It's like, yeah, we the idea in this democracy is that we vote our leaders in for folks that we hope will represent us. Uh, and yeah, and sometimes it doesn't transpire that way. Because during election season, I always hear like, it's people are always saying all those like hot words, things that are going to be catchy to for them to get our vote. But then where's the follow up? And I wonder if there is a little more accountability that there needs to be. I mean, it's like going back to school, right? Like you have homework. you you're expected to have done your homework, the next day. Uh, but where's the accountability on the larger and the macro scale? Um, I mean, do we just wait till the next election? But then between then and now, there's so much chaos, so much, to say troubled times that can be created is making it very minuscule. But yeah, I don't know, just some thoughts as to like how, yeah, and how can we do better, I guess. And you don't have to answer this. It's just where my mind is going right now. But, thank you so much for just weaving and how everything is so interconnected. And I hope as our listeners are hearing this and, practicing this amazing act of listening, they too are pondering or wondering, what can I do better within my own community, within my everyday, whether it's like, I always tell folks, it's like, okay, let's say you're going to go get a coffee or a tea. You're going to go to a business of some sort to, yes, you're paying something, but it doesn't have to be so transactional. It can also be, you can build community right there. You're seeing these people on a daily basis, you know, even if it's small talk, it builds upon each other, whether you go to your local farmers market, whatever your routines may be that day. I think it's part of what builds a stronger community, and kind of leads to those collaborative partnerships. Not that you should intentionally engage in these conversations because you're like, how will this help me down the road? But more just because it's the right thing to do. And if there happens to be some type of collaboration that evolves from it down the road, amazing, even better. I think, I mean, I always think about like, I end a lot of my conversations or my email interactions with folks about like, hey, let me know if there's an opportunity to collaborate. Because I think that's wonderful. If we can find an opportunity to collaborate, especially with folks you've gotten to know, you build a relationship with, it
Hmm.
makes it a little bit easier, more timeless. But yeah, as far as shifting a little bit to strategic intelligence in action, so strategic intelligence often refers to the ability to make sense of complex systems.
Mhm.
So how do you see that playing out in partnerships? And maybe I've kind of answered a
Absolutely.
little bit with
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
that partnership, you get to know each other. So maybe there's
Yeah.
a little bit of like that shorthand, hopefully. But I love your insights on, how
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
partners use data, foresight, scenery planning. So yeah, I'm all
Yeah.
here. Listen,
Yeah,
thank you.
I can start with an example that would illustrate how application of strategic intelligence in action. United Nations is a quintessential example of strategic intelligence in action. And because what is strategic intelligence? It collects data, it uses data, it brings several data points together to see how we can work together, whether it's development or whether it is, governance or whether it is peace. And it brings to this vast, data points to be able to provide the necessary service to different communities. Are you able to hear me, Jose? I just got a note that says my internet connection is unstable.
Yep.
But
If you can repeat what you just said, because it was a little bit spotted.
oh, okay. I just got a note that said that my internet connection
Oh,
is
no,
being
no. Yeah, before that, what you
Oh,
were
before
saying, if you
that,
can,
I was saying
yes,
that
thank you.
United Nations is an example of how multiple data points can be used to strategically provide a service. I mean, there are a lot of criticisms of United Nations saying it's not efficient. It has 190 nations actively participating, but the number of nations continue to increase as more nations gain independence. But nevertheless, I mean, to think about it, the entire planet, comes together and to discuss problems that collectively impact us as one humanity and to help individual nations with certain problems where they have permanent missions in for instance in Albania and the Democratic Republic of Congo and and European nations when it comes to human rights institute, and they have peacekeeping force and they have regional institutions. So I have had the privilege of, for instance, in India, with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees in the 80s, when, as part of, again, collaborative partnerships, the University of Delhi, the School of Social Work, had this research, rather relatively large research project that was done in collaboration with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. And they were, trying to understand how best to help the Afghan refugees and Iranian refugees who were waiting in Delhi as the UNHCR was trying to plan and help them with the resettlement options in other countries, and most of them in European countries and in United States, Western countries. So in the process of working with them, I came to see firsthand the effectiveness of collaborative partnerships between public, private, and international organizations. That was a successful venture. Likewise, when I was a doctoral student at Berkeley, we had the privilege of taking classes from any other department. So I took classes from Haas, although my primary institution was in social welfare. That's where my doctorate is from Haas School of Business. I took a class in total quality management, nonprofit management, and in organizational excellence. So as part of that, well, as part of a class project, we introduced the total quality management in one of the local hospitals, the Department of Social Services, and we specifically helped them with how to reduce the time that they spend in record keeping so they can spend more time in direct service. That was a successful project, and total quality management Deming was a guru, and it was brilliant. I still love it, but for some reason we didn't follow it through. But Japan followed it elaborately in so many different ways, Kaizen and PDCA and so on and so forth, where they brought quality care not only to production but to people's lives. And they worked very hard. Of course, that was problematic in some cases, but there was involvement of workers in the process, and total quality management was successful there. And then recently, for instance, with Sustainable Development Goals, as you know, as a member of as a member of the delegation of the Mediators Beyond Borders International, I was able to observe and participate in the high-level political forum of the UN regarding the Sustainable Development Goals. And so I had this tremendous opportunity to listen to leaders of the nations present their progress with these 5 Sustainable Development Goals that they had taken up for this year's deliberations, and also listen to the president of ECOSAC and, the United Nations General Assembly leaders, leader Guterres, and Antonio Guterres, whom I respect tremendously, his commitment to peace and commitment to work. Again, please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that United Nations is perfect. It has any large entity such as that. It would be an anomaly if they didn't have problems. And combine that with the backtracking on some countries that had promised millions of dollars and do not give them, countries that can give that money. And so that is really problematic, and a moral lapse on countries that don't keep up their promises with continued funding for United Nations, because they provide service for all the countries, for the peace of the world, for maintaining harmonious relationships between different entities, for protecting people from violent insurrections, and protecting human rights, protecting nutrition rights, protecting health rights. I mean, you name it, United Nations does it. So there are several levels of collaborative partnerships that can happen in various ways when we apply strategic intelligence. That's where United Nations is, I mean, I say quintessential applicator of strategic intelligence, because they collect data, they have United Nations University, and they have membership in so many different collaborations with the different multi-stakeholder agencies and non-profit organizations, and civil society groups are valued and cherished in UN, at the UN. And so therefore we need a model where we celebrate those kind of achievements and open it up for where every nation is given equal power, instead of maintaining a status quo, and instead of going and lecturing to member organizations about values that we don't even follow or we in our own countries. And that is unacceptable. And because we want to be able to protect our own visibility and our own how other nations and other societies perceive us. That is the responsibility of any administration. So in this context, what we are seeing is a failure of strategic intelligence, failure of applying what we know to work best, and then just flying by the seat of one's pants. And so, that is not how large level administration should be taking place. And it's pointless, for instance, to fire federal workers and then say, oh, we fired the wrong people, then create havoc in their personal lives and their communities when people have moved and, not knowing what to do, sold their their homes because they couldn't pay the mortgage, and then hire them back without in a topsy-turvy, lopsided manner, and then keep telling them, oh, we don't know whether you're going to be kept or whether you're going to be fired or whether you're going to be retired. That is torture. That meets the levels of emotional torture. And so, that is a violation of foundational human right. A right to livelihood should not be disrupted on precarious grounds based on someone's whims and fancies without an established data point application in a way that actually promotes efficiency. You cannot, bring about destruction in the name of promoting efficiency when in fact the methods followed are the least efficient methods, least effective methods. They're neither cost efficient nor effective nor humanitarian. So therefore, we're seeing the failure of application of strategic intelligence. And when you take that in combination with absence of an appreciative inquiry to understand why is this happening, to reframing what is happening in a way that serves American society and international society well, and brings our alliances in positive actualizing mode and promote peace here and everywhere. And 7 million people marched last weekend. And for someone not to be curious to ask, why did 7 million Americans decided to spend a Saturday marching, almost, feeling unsure whether they're going to be protected, whether they're going to be attacked, whether they are going to be detained. And they took that risk and marched peacefully, and collaboratively, even with love in their hearts. I didn't march, but that's what I read. And so when we listen to that, and when we listen to the complete absence of curiosity on the part of the leaders to find out how can we support them, how can we ask them, how can we help you, how can we bring everyone together, that to me is complete failure of a lack of emotional intelligence, social intelligence, and appreciative intelligence, as well as a colossal failure of strategic intelligence. Fear, they can hold people, control people by fear only to a limited extent of time. We know that. We have, Stalin's Russia, we have Hitler's Germany, West Germany, and many who saw the turmoil of Hitler's Nazi regime decided when Germany was divided to join East Germany, thinking, oh, maybe the communist regime would be better, but they experienced worse totalitarian regime. We were, as part of a Fulbright faculty group, we were taken to East Germany's the Stasi headquarters, where they kept miles and miles of records. I mean, literally miles long records. I mean, spaces where the records were kept on every citizen. They kept them. The East German communist regime was so brutal, in controlling their population and totalitarian that they expected children to report against their parents, siblings to report against each other, husband against wife. That was that cruel and evil. And so the Germans who were escaping Nazi regime then fell into another totalitarian regime, like many East German countries did, like Czechoslovakia. There's an author who wrote this phenomenal book called Born Under a Cruel Star, where the similar thing, one totalitarian regime to another. And America is a beacon of democracy, or was a beacon of democracy. Now we are considered a flawed democracy with a score of 7.65 on the democracy index. And Taiwan, for instance, as a small nation, has a considered full-fledged democracy with per score of over 9 out of 10. And China has a score of like 1.1 to 2. I don't remember the exact thing. So we are opening up the world for governments that have been considered as totalitarian to take over. That's what happens, when there is a complete absence of strategies to promote democracy, maintain what you have accomplished through sacrifices of millions of others who went before you to maintain the benefits of a constitutional republic such as ours, a democracy, a thriving democracy. When you allow it to fall into the ruins of other previously ruined governments, because nothing that's controlled by fear, by retribution, by thuggery could be maintained beyond a certain period. It will fail, and when that fails, then the future generation will have to pay the price, just like Germany did, and just like so many Eastern European nations did, just like Soviet Union did. And so we do not want to be in that place, and we need to protect our democracy, our constitutional republic, and we need to, apply strategic intelligence and bring about a collaboration of all the people, we the people. United Nations says, we the peoples. I like that, because it's many people of many different nations. Here in United States, we the people, have to come together irrespective of our political affiliation, irrespective of our petty differences, and magnanimously focus on our children's well-being, our future prosperity, peace, and health and goodness. I mean, respect for each other, so that no man can declare with impunity, women as objects of sex, or children to be, not given even basic rights to the proper education, health, and nutrition, and safety and security in their homes, in their communities. That has to change, and that's why we need collaborative partnerships, and we need the application of emotional intelligence, social intelligence, collective intelligence, and strategic intelligence with an appreciative inquiry.
Thank you. Shifting a little toward equity, which is something unfortunately we don't talk about enough nowadays. Is there, in partnerships, there's often a power imbalance between whether it's large institutions, grassroots actors. You kind of delved a little into like the gender norms. There's a lot of inequality right there. So how do we navigate that and ensure some equity? How do we foster a shared vision among very different stakeholders with the competing priorities? Love to get your insights on that.
Absolutely. And we were doing a good job in equity too. Equality is treating everyone the same. That is a laudable goal. Absolutely, we want. But treating everyone the same means everyone starts from the same vantage point. That's not true, My mom, as I mentioned in one of our previous podcasts, did not even complete eighth grade. So, but she was brilliant in so many ways. And so she taught me many valuable lessons. But nevertheless, when I needed help with math homework or English homework, she didn't speak any English at all. I was struggling, and I would, my uncle, my paternal uncle, and my paternal aunt were the only ones in our family, entire, extended family, who were college educated. And so I would wait for them to come home, and sometimes they wouldn't come home from their work. Not my aunt, but from my uncle, for my uncle. And so I didn't get any help. So I would, go with my homework undone. And then we had to stand up for those who didn't complete the homework. And I would stand up, and I felt ashamed that I had to stand up. And so it was a Catholic school, so the nuns would give a great lecture on how sinful it is for us not to do the homework, because they characterized it as failure of your duty. But I couldn't explain. My father was a businessman, and he was busy with business, and he didn't even complete high school. And so, so how do you explain that, right? And so you grow up with a sense of shame, you grow up with a sense of inadequacy, because you begin to see yourself as not being intelligent enough to figure out the homework on your own. And the school did not offer any extra assistance for those children whose parents who are first generation learners. right? And then I somehow managed and, worked very hard and, learned, spent enormous amount of time in trying to understand, and somehow, became a good student in middle school and, and in high school, sort of aced all the exams and was, considered like, because I spent enormous amount of time, studying that. But it was possible for me to do that because I didn't have to do any of the housework, and because my family's economic standing made it possible that my food was brought to me, and when I was home, and then I went to this boarding school where there was regular periods of study and time. The reason why I'm saying this is that there are so many like me whose parents are first generation, who feel ashamed, who feel inadequate, and not knowing how to complete their homework. And then when there is no extra help offered to them, when they, Harvard, for instance, said, okay, you maintain a good GPA, many years ago, and if your parents earns below a certain amount of annual income, we will provide you with admission. We will admit you into that. And there are other universities. Emory University is saying that now. There are other universities, and public universities like California State University system provides tremendous opportunities for first generation learners. Like for instance, in my California State University, Sacramento, I went through 4 different presidents during my time of working there, and including our current president. They asked during graduation, if you are a member of the first generation learner, please stand up. And so many of our students stand up. And every graduation I attended, I would start crying because they reminded me of all the struggles I went through to get a college education, to succeed, and all of that. But why is it important? Because when you are a graduate, the level of capacity that you bring to your mothering process, your parenting process, the model you set up for your children are enormous. And so all my children have completed up to masters and, Juris Doctor degree, and my daughter 2 masters, and my youngest one masters, and, 2 different women, journalism bachelors and masters in film studies, and, my son business management and bachelors, and Juris Doctor and as his advanced degree, and my daughter's 2 masters, one in biodefense, one in international relations, another PhD in biodefense, nearly completed. She's still in the process of that, and maybe she may not, because now she takes her working role and her mothering role so seriously. She dedicates every waking moment to those 2 things. So the point I'm making is there are many brilliant minds in our country and worldwide who are not able to succeed in schools because we don't provide enough resources, and we don't provide enough nutrition. And we used to be able to provide nutritious school lunches, and now we are taking away money even for those school lunches when we are giving trillions of dollars in tax breaks to people who do not need that money. To me, no amount of analysis. Why are we doing that? This whole trickle-down economic theory is an utter nonsense. The assumption that when you give tax breaks to the wealthy, they are going to reinvest in the country and people are going to get more wealth is just complete a failure. If it was applied properly, perhaps there is some chance. But as it is applied now, trickle-down economic theory doesn't work. We have enough ample evidence. Even then, we continue to do that, depriving our children of equitable opportunities. Yes, everyone can go to school, there's public education, but just going to school to be able to serve as a school to prison pipeline, which is an avenue for many of our children from, underprivileged, historically underrepresented economic groups, because their communities are redlined, resources are not given to them. They don't have adequate housing, they don't have adequate employment opportunities, they don't have adequate, help from the law enforcement. They are made to fear the law enforcement. So combination of factors contribute to this status where there's no equity. they don't start from the same equal opportunity. So therefore, the little bit of resource that we were investing in providing equitable opportunities, in providing college preparation, in providing, considerations for college admissions, or vocational training, all of those things are being destroyed in various piecemeal process without calling them as such, so that we don't even have clear understanding of where we stand in terms of educational opportunities for our children. And then to put universities on hold, saying if you abide by rules XYZ, you get resources, otherwise you don't, is it's not sending a good, optimistic message to our children, to our future generations, right? And where we are failing our nation as a whole because of lack of equity. And if we had appreciative inquiry, and if we had actual innovation, and we use data that is collected, properly, it is easy to use statistics to prove the wrong point. And one can even use statistics to prove something which is untrue to have some validity. We cannot prove it to be true, but we can have it as having validity and perhaps even reliability. But the question we should be asking is, where are we in terms of our well-being, the well-being of our public, and the lack of peace, and the status of, or the extreme levels of acrimonious experiences of our children and members of our communities, because it is purposefully orchestrated as such to divide us and rule us. And so to, foundationally undo all the good that we did in a constitutional republic such as ours is unacceptable. And people have to come together and collaborate with each other equitably and equally.
Thank you. So true on so many levels. And how easy or quickly we forget, or I don't know, maybe it's just the ego, the I gets in the way, and we forget about our history, and uh, from whether it's our upbringing, whether it's the fact that the ongoing thing that kind of keeps there's this ongoing like targeting of like immigrants when this nation was built on immigrants, and shifting the perspective and creating these narratives that to scare, I guess, it's creating a culture of fear. I guess that's kind of what it perpetuates. The othering, I guess, is kind of
Yes.
how they justify it, unfortunately.
Mm.
Um, so thank you for bringing a spotlight to the need for collaborative partnerships, and not just on a global level, national level, but definitely on a every day to day. So as we look ahead, what capabilities would you say do leaders, institutions need now to collaborate more effectively in the face of global challenges? Especially, thinking about, you know, this time shall come to an end at some point, and there will be new leadership. And I can only gather just like how much relationship building there needs to be done. Like there is so many of those long-standing relationships for decades are no longer there, or are very much dwindling away. So if you have any thoughts on like how can individuals, not just organizations, contribute to meaningful collaborative efforts, and what maybe gives you hope when you look at the future for partnerships and systems change?
Absolutely. I mean, I volunteer for an organization called Ashoka. And again, this is my personal viewpoint, not Ashoka's. And so Ashoka was established in the 1980s, right? And now it is thriving. It's an international organization. We have Ashoka in many different parts of the country, and we have Ashoka Global in Washington, D.C. That's where I volunteer. And so I get to see the progress that Ashoka has made through the Changemakers program. And Ashoka was founded by a visionary called Bill Drayton, and he used his own, he was given a MacArthur Genius Award, and so he used that, and he used his own funds and sought funds from other entities to establish Ashoka and build Ashoka. So he believed that everyone is a change maker. Everyone is a leader. So when you start with the assumption, which is what I believe too, that all of us have the potential to make change, to bring about change. After all, what are human beings? We are all about growth and development, right? If we don't grow, if we don't develop, we are not going to be able to live. Our entire bodies are growing, changing. We are changing. Change is the only constant thing. And so, if we think about human life as a change and everyone as a change maker, then everyone is also a leader, right? And but traditionally, we have had this conception of monarchy as as some people being, sort of given this right to be a leader just because of the family that they are born into. That's an archaic notion because we know now, beyond any doubt, that these individuals don't have any special capacities. They simply, ascribed this status that they got this because of for this sheer reason of being born into a certain time and certain community. And there are other nations that have abolished monarchy, and some have ceremonial monarchy. And so, whatever the point is, we know that every human being has some leadership capacity. It's just a matter of how circumstances come together to nourish that leadership capacity and how they are supported by their community members to keep ascending on the leadership ladder. And Joe Mazzulla, I don't know if you've heard of him, Jose, but, I told you before that my family, we will watch a lot of sports, and especially these days because seems to be not so, trauma evoking, compared to other news that happens every day that news organizations seem to be reporting. So Joe Mazzulla is coach of Boston Celtics. He led them to national championship. The year before last year, and he was asked, maybe 2 years ago, during one of the games when the British royal family members of two members of the royal family, I believe it was in the Crown Prince and his wife, were attending, and they asked him after the game, "Oh, how did you feel the royal family was presenting?" Oh, he said, "Oh, I don't know any royal family other than Jesus, Joseph, and Mary." That's what he said. And so I was like, listen, I happened to be listening to it, and I literally, my respect for him went up tremendously. He already had my respect because he is such a young coach and so, full of, you cannot upset him. He doesn't get easily upset, and he led his team to, the victory to national championship. And he said that. The point being, we artificially prop up individuals sometimes, whether they have leadership qualities or not. So when you believe in, well, like what Bill Drayton believed in Ashoka, that everybody is a change maker, everybody is a leader, we can cultivate that. And so every child, every school should have leadership training, how you work as a leader and without competition, through collaboration. And some of these tech companies, Google and other tech companies and Microsoft, have accomplished that, to some degree, teams. And how do you work as teams and how do you accomplish as members of teams? Everyone is a leader in a team. And so Ashoka has accomplished so many change maker programs. Every year they select their fellows who have established a pathway to have an innovative program and then using the seed fund and spread it and bring others into the fold and initiate change. And that is leadership, and that can happen. So Ashoka is a good example, and there are many other organizations that are doing that. So it can be done, but we need to continue to have fun. Ford Foundation does it, and there are so many other foundations provide support for those kind of activities, and so we can do that, accomplish that. And so.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for, the good work you're doing in your community. And I think it's just a sign to folks to listening that, there there's a lot of wonderful organizations doing a lot of good work, and they are in dire need of volunteers. So if you have some extra time, or you've ever wanted to volunteer, well, this is the time, and it
Absolutely.
can be everywhere from, like, you know just 1 to 2 hours to many more, or there's even like virtual opportunities for folks who,
Mhm.
might be like, I'm really interested in this, but oh, they happen to be located in this other place that's really far away, or I don't have transportation. So there's definitely ways to support. So thank you for doing that. That's ever so needed. Um, might you share, as we kind of get close to the end here, but one partnership you admire, past or present? And if, I mean, it could be a showcase, it could be something else if you like. And if you have one piece of advice, someone launching a cross-sector partnership tomorrow, what would that be?
So I have admiration for several organizations that do enormously good work. Columbia University, for instance, academic institutions have partnership with public-private partnerships, and they have a negotiation institute, they have human rights institute, and Harvard, for instance, they provide training in negotiation, and executives come and take, their executive leadership program is phenomenal. I completed that recently, and I thought it was fantastic in terms of the training, and not only just team collaborations between groups, but negotiations between national teams and groups and entities and private sector entities, businesses, and international levels of negotiation. And what are the conditions under which you can setting up the negotiation process itself, physical, the arrangement, and the necessary emotional involvement, intelligence, all of those factors are crucial. And so Harvard does so many different, their international, faculty, visiting professor programs. I mean, just so much mediation training. And Columbia does a UC Berkeley, for instance. I mean, they just got 5 Nobel Prizes, to their faculty. And it's just amazing what UC Berkeley does. And, it's possible to view an exhibit regarding human rights and walk over to a different part of campus and then listen to someone who is wearing a skirt, a man wearing a skirt, just standing in Sproul Plaza and giving a cohesive lecture on how important it is to control the proliferation of internet sites. This was because internet was becoming just in the 90s, and listen to him and then I'll stop for a cup of coffee, and someone will be sitting there with a chessboard, and because I love playing chess, and I'll say, hey, can I play a game? And the person one day said, yeah. And then he defeated me in no time. And then I got to talk to him because I was the women's chess champion. And, when I was at the university, I used to think, oh, I'm a good player, but he defeated me. And I got to talk to him, and he was an unhoused person. That time, the term unhoused hasn't come. He was homeless. And he was saying he spends a lot of time at Berkeley University coffee houses but he had his PhD in, I forget which discipline, one of the, either sociology or political science or one of them. And he, by various currents of life, he became homeless. And firsthand, he explained to me how difficult it is to get back to being housed once you become homeless. Because it's very difficult to have a place where you can receive your mail. Initially, his sister would allow him to receive mail at her house, and then she got some angry at him for not getting out of the streets, and because she had given him a time frame saying by which time he should have gotten a job and he should have been. But he had tried his very best. And just the prospect of taking a shower, and he said he didn't like going to the shelters because they were not always kept clean, and there would be people who would be taking drugs, and he was not on any drugs, and people were almost categorized him as soon as they knew he was unhoused. And so that Berkeley is that kind of an environment where you have everything to understand the human condition as it is. And that's one of the reasons why their students excel, because there is absence of fear you know. And if you explained why you couldn't complete this paper on time, I mean, there were strict requirements. But if you are, as I was, a mom and raising three children at that time, and so, my youngest one was in daycare, and because I couldn't pay that sliding scale fee, by the way, Berkeley was not the example that I gave, but the Berkeley had a cooperative center where most childcare is free. It's a little bit of sliding care, but I will, after my classes, I'll run and go to the childcare and pick up my son. And then I had hours where I would go, volunteer at the center. Every parent had to volunteer and for a few hours. And then sometimes I would run with my book bag and my youngest one, who was relatively heavy, and to catch the bus to go to the place where my housing was. And the bus driver would sometimes see me running and wouldn't wait for that extra 5 seconds for me to hop on the bus. And I would stand there literally weeping, wondering what is my fate. And so, and my son would see me crying and say, "Don't cry, Mama." And, in his own way. And, and then he would immediately want to get down and say, so I don't have to carry him in the book bag. And then we would have to wait till the next bus came. I mean, that is the kind of struggle families are going through. But despite all that struggle, Berkeley made me feel like I was worth something. That, I had the capacity to excel. I had the capacity to finish this rigorous doctoral program. And I remember being exhausted and not sleeping properly. And, and I was also working as a research associate and as a teaching assistant while doing my doctoral program and caring for three children and all of that stuff. And this is life for many. And people who have never experienced this, for them to remove this little bit of programs that average Americans have, which is about 60% of Americans are now living from paycheck to paycheck. The number has gone up. It used to be that at least half the population could afford a home, for home ownership. Now even that is coming down. So it is people are trying to figure out where the American dream went. And so at this time, to be able to come and deprive human beings of collaborative partnerships by taking away money from nonprofit organizations. There is almost a war that is being waged on nonprofit organizations in this current administration. Funds are being taken away left and right. In fact, the executive director of Nonprofit Coalition was called such a derogatory term, and she was treated with such disrespect when she testified in front of the Congress. And those responses to her, she shared it on LinkedIn. And it's just unbelievable. And so the successful collaborative partnership that I see happening in Ashoka and organizations like Ashoka, or because of committed leaders, committed members, and committed pathways, and because they have established collaborations with the government in many countries. Pakistan, for instance, one of the change makers has established collaboration with the National Social Service. So they've combined community service of the students with providing the necessary services for the population, and then integrating it with the education. In Brazil, there is enormous level of collaboration between public-private partnership. In some of the European countries, that's in Spain, for instance. In fact, last week or 2 weeks before, one of the researchers who are collaborating with other change makers in Spain had about 6 different topics asking me if I would provide a summary of the literature review that those researchers have developed using artificial intelligence. And so, artificial intelligence, AI, when you use them, there's nothing wrong in using them for research. You still have to double check everything, right? It's very fast. It brings a lot of data points together, but you have to be able to make sure they're not hallucinating, they're not providing citations that do not exist in reality. AI does that. And then you go through that and review that. And so that researcher said she would do all that. I just have to provide a summary of those topics. And so I reframed the topics a little bit. So these things are happening. Collaborations, international collaborations. I never met this researcher from Spain, and we're doing it virtually, and someone from Ashoka Global introduced. So there are tremendous levels of good people of goodwill working together to bring about the successful collaborations. And Stanford has, for instance, a social entrepreneur program and social innovation program where entrepreneurship is not simply creating economic capital, but also social capital, and through innovation projects that are environmentally sound, that are community growing as opposed to community diminishing. And so all these institutions, as I mentioned, California State University, Sacramento has this business center where they invite business leaders, small business leaders, and experienced business leaders to mentor other leaders. So good things are happening. We don't hear about them unless people get out of their comfort zone like me and try to find where good things are happening and associate us. I do not watch television other than sports teams and maybe half an hour of news at best, in a week or so. But I do watch, because I'm a Catholic, I watch the EWTN Mass as much as I can. And so it's my way of quieting myself because that's how I grew up in Catholic, watching Mass every day. And so it calms my soul and it gathers me, helps me gather my energy for the rest of the day. And so the television and artificial intelligence, internet, those are all technology. Those technologies can be put to good use, but we have to have the right frame of mind. And we have to bring that digital resources accessible to everyone in our society. There are still many parts of our country where reliable internet is a luxury. Members of our own wealthiest nation in the country have to go to public libraries to be able to access internet. That should not be the case. Every child should have at least a reliable computer, that doesn't break down. And every working adult should have one, access to these tools if we really want to have an equitable, equal society. So it's extremely important to provide resources if we want these collaborative partnerships to succeed. We cannot, preach social justice and goodness to someone who doesn't have even basic necessities, right? They need to be, and we are a culture already of mass distraction. We like to distract our people with all this, sometimes pointless entertainment shows and, arguments. And now the social media does that because of the algorithms to help people fight each other and, do post stuff for the sake of likes and, and so on and so forth. So we need to be able to get back to our foundation and say, I am not determined by the number of likes I receive in social media or by the number of, vacation that a person takes. That a person is determined by the character of their belief, their integrity, their system, their service to fellow human beings, then their respect for fellow human beings' lives. the sense of dignity that they share with others. None of us are perfect. We all get annoyed at sometimes, and we all get, sad and, sometimes even hopeless, although hope is an eternally cherished, value that we can all use. But the fact that we breathe, that the fact that we are able to live, that in itself is a gift that should be acknowledged as such in us and in each other, and celebrate that. If somebody is given the responsibility of managing other people's money, they better take it seriously. They don't use it for themselves. They make every dollar how best to put to good use for the sake of the community, for the school or school district or the organization, or as the region or as the nation. Anyone who takes it and uses it for their own greed and pettiness and and indulgence is completely being unscrupulous, to say the least. And those kind of things we need to be able to correct, and engage in social correction through our compassionate approach, through our peaceful approach, and with everyone, and through a non-violent, peaceful approach, because violence doesn't accomplish anything.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all those wonderful examples, and just there is hope, and I hope that's what folks take away from this conversation as they're listening. And I always think, I imagine, because this will air on the radio in a couple of weeks. So hopefully, what we're talking about would be a bit more irrelevant and things are much better. That this is the eternal optimist in me always. But this too shall pass. And so thank you so much. As I've really enjoyed our conversation today, digging deep. I think some things to just kind of take away is that everything's interconnected. Let's not lose hope. Let's strive for searching, really just going back to like our values, our morals,
Mhm.
Really appreciate this powerful, thought-provoking conversation. Thank you for your insights, your clarity, just your ongoing commitment to building bridges where there are divides, to shaping partnerships that don't just solve problems but transform systems. It's not just work; it's our everyday lives. So, whether troubled times, disruption, uncertainty, I think collaboration really is at the key. I do these presentations from time to time, and um, I always have a slide on like the 5 styles of conflict and or like conflict styles, and it's avoidance, competing, and collaboration is one of them. And I always have it on there, whether I'm talking to folks in middle school or whether I'm talking to much older folks. I find as though rarely do people have an opportunity to learn about conflict styles. Many times you don't even talk or think about it. You just kind of do because either you're busy or it's not really the field you're in. Um, Many times it's modeled to you at a young age. And so if we observe lots of avoidance from our loved ones as we're growing up, we're like, okay, that is what seems to work for them. So I think that can work for me too. And so
Mhm.
rarely do we see collaboration. And so I think once more, how do we model that? And some ideas that I've kind of embedded into my own life is just not only having conversations about it, but also um, embedding it into everything that I do, whether, the way that I sign off when I uh, finish a conversation or send an email, uh, embedding it into my presentation styles. I think it's just kind of keep reminding ourselves because it's very easy to just get distracted, shift, pivot toward the I, the ego, and not thinking about, how is this truly impacting everybody and what is truly the right thing to do for everybody, not just for me, myself, and I. So To our Thank you so much for,
Of course.
collaboration isn't
Yeah.
just strategy, it's a moral imperative. To our listeners, in today's episode resonated with you, we invite you to reflect on the partnerships in your own life, community, or work. Are they rooted in trust? Are they adaptive, equitable, and resilient? Because peace building starts not in policy papers or global summits, but in the everyday decisions we make to listen, to include, and to work together across differences. So thank you again for joining us at Peace Building Initiatives. Don't forget, subscribe, share the episodes, follow for more conversation, explore the heart of peace, justice, and transformative change. Until next time, stay engaged, stay compassionate, keep building peace wherever you are, one person at a time. Thank you all.